Welcome back to the Reality Show Life Coach podcast. I'm your host, Lynn Grogan. I'm a certified life coach, and this week I am flying solo once again to talk about season 45, episode 9 of Survivor. So, this week, flying solo, super intentional. We're in the US, we had US Thanksgiving, and I decided ahead of time I was going to take the week off of work from my business and then also from the podcast. So kind of knew going into it what's going to happen, but we had a super fun Thanksgiving. We travel full time in our RV and we are camped out next to some friends of ours near Yuma, Arizona. So we just spent the week having Friendsgiving, eating food. On Friday, we drove down to the border and we walked over into Mexico and we just scoped it out. So it's been a super fun week. But now I'm happy to dive back into work and to talk about Survivor, one of my favorite shows. So if you watched episode 9, we're getting close to the end. The most of the episode was featuring this 3-stage immunity challenge that they had. So I've never seen anything like this before. It was actually pretty wild. And I always have to marvel at the creativity from the production team. So what happened was the gang gets tree mail that says, hey, you need to self-select 3 different teams for this immunity challenge, and you should feel anxious about it, which I don't even know if they needed to add that because, I think anytime any human is presented with a situation wherein they're told, hey, do something, we're not going to tell you why, you often feel anxious. So they have this 3-stage immunity challenge with self-selected teams, and they learn that in the stages, they're all competing against each other. The first 2 teams that hit the first finish line move ahead, and the team that loses their vote, which is the worst thing that could happen to them at this stage of the game, besides being voted out. The second team, they proceed in the challenge. The next team that loses, they can no longer compete, but it's neutral. They don't lose their votes, but they also don't get any advantages. And then the third team gets to the end. By getting to this 3rd stage, they get to go to the sanctuary. They get some food, amazing. And the person who wins out of all 3 of those also gets immunity. So it's a wild ride, this episode. I think mostly because they just don't know how many votes will be on the table. So that first team who lost their vote, they do have the chance to earn it back. So it's Emily and Katura and Austin, and they do this challenge where they have a math challenge, and Emily and Katura do not win back their vote, but Austin does. And it's interesting to see how when he goes back to camp, he lies about it. It's the game of Survivor. Of course, you're going to want any advantage that you can. He tells his alliance that he has not lost his vote, but he himself has lost. He tells his alliance he hasn't lost his vote, but to everyone else, they think that he is without a vote. At the end of the episode, we see that Kendra is at home. She is blindsided. We see this coming after a week where Kelly was blindsided. So I think if I had a hunch, this is probably what we're going to see for the upcoming weeks with all of the episodes, because there's just so much going on that there's never a moment where you get a sense where they go into these tribal councils at the end and have a sure sense of actually who's going home. So there's probably a part of their brain that's just yeah, I might go home. And then another part of their brain that's just I'm pretty sure that what we plan to do is what we're going to do. So Kendra went in. I think she thought she was going to be okay, but no, sent home. So that is the episode for today. I picked out a few things that I wanted to talk about that I thought were interesting from the episode. And the first one was, they've been doing this thing, now with these 90-minute episodes where they show kind of the recap of what happened the previous episode with Tribal Council. So the very beginning of the episode, they're all getting back to camp. We have the night vision going on. And Bruce is super upset because last week Kelly was blindsided and he and she were in an alliance, and his experience of the alliance, he learns pretty quickly from the rest of the tribe, is very different than Kelly's experience. He hears reports that he was overbearing and very controlling, and that's not how he thought he was coming off. So we have this really interesting, like in the moment interview with Bruce where he is reflecting on what happened. And I'm guessing that like he went into that interview moment kind of thinking like, okay, Kelly went home, I must have done something wrong. So he's reflecting on this, kind of thinking about what happened. And then he also has this moment where he's really kind of shocked to hear that he has been overbearing. Um, my guess is that his relationship with Kelly wasn't a part of his kind of manufactured fun uncle role. He probably was behaving similar to how he does in the rest of his life. So I think this really took him off guard that he was getting feedback, that the way that he was behaving was different than how it was received. So you see him go into this whole conversation where he's just like, I didn't realize I was doing that. And also, I wonder if I'm doing this back at home. So he's thinking more globally here. And I think a lot of us do this, where if, we find out news about ourselves that's very different than we thought it was. Oh my gosh, we start scanning. Where else am I doing this? It's almost like, I don't know if Bruce was like panicking in that moment, but very concerned that he was doing something also to people that he loved at home, that wasn't well received. So it's interesting because in this moment, like Bruce could have gotten kind of defensive, like, nah, no, I wasn't doing that. But there's something about this that doesn't like have his protection, his protective walls coming up. It's like he receives that information. It's like, okay, if this is true, what am I going to do about it? Um, and I think, oh, man, a lot of us do this. I had experience of this, man, in my early 20s. I worked at this coffee shop while I was in college, and we just had a great group of mostly women working there. We were all friends, we all hung out, and our interactions, or at least my perception of things, was that we all just like teased each other. And there's this particular person I worked with a lot, and I would tease her a lot. I just thought, like, oh, we banter back and forth. This is super fun. And then there was one day where the manager pulled me aside and she said, hey, this coworker doesn't really want to work with you anymore because she thinks you're kind of mean. I just remember it was such a gut punch because it was like, oh, like, I think we all go into these things with our best intentions. And then when you hear feedback that the way you're behaving is not the way you thought it was, you just like, oh, it just hits you. And we see it hitting Bruce too. And his immediate reaction is to take action. It's almost like knee jerk, to fix things. He's like, I'm going to go home. I'm going to talk to my wife. I'm going to talk to my daughter. I'm going to like, I have to course correct this immediately. And I understand that kind of like that fear immediately of like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this terrible thing. And then what might happen as a result of this? He sees this terrible thing happen where Kelly goes home. He thinks he's responsible. So of course he's kind of thinking globally in the moment. I mean, I think from like a coaching perspective, when I think about this type of thing happening, we find out information about ourselves is different than what we thought it was. Knee-jerk reaction, totally what a lot of us would do. But there's another way that we can go about this that slows the process down. Often if we're reacting to something, we may take actions that aren't terribly supportive of us or the people receiving them. So, Bruce here, of course, wants to go like, fix everything, which might actually do the opposite of what he wants. He might end up being overbearing in his reaction as well. So, if you're experiencing this, or if I was like sitting in front of Bruce, what I might do is just try to slow things down. And, one of the first things you can do is just sit with the thing that you just learned. And by sit with it, I mean just, contemplate it and try to have some compassion for yourself. Like, he didn't know he was being like this. This is new information. He's not a bad person. We're not bad people. for being ourselves. But now that we have new information, like, can we have some kindness to ourselves? Like, oh, I didn't know I was doing that. There must be some reason that I'm showing up that way. But now that I know, I'm so glad to know. And maybe I do want to do something about this, but I'm not wrong. Like, there's nothing wrong with me. I didn't do anything terrible for having done that. Um, I was just behaving in a certain way and I just didn't know. So it's like seeing if you can apply compassion to yourself for what just happened there. So if I could go back to younger version of me when I was 20, I definitely beat myself up when I had learned I treated one of my coworkers that way. But it would been like, oh, you didn't know. You just thought this is the way that we all interact with each other. And now you know differently. So you can do differently, but it doesn't have to mean that I'm wrong or bad. It's just I didn't know. So it's really just that pause to observe, like, okay, if we don't need to act immediately or react immediately, like, how might I treat myself? So, and like after you've like opened up to yourself in that way and you feel a little bit calmer, then from that place of feeling more calm and not in a state of reaction, you can be like, okay, now that I'm not reacting, like, what do I want to do here? Um, for Bruce, he may still want to talk to his wife and daughter. He may still want to course correct. He may want to gather information. It really depends on what their relationship is like. And I'm sure his conversation with his wife would be a little bit different than his daughter. His wife, as a peer, might say, okay, yeah, I know, here, I've observed this. But it's also interesting to think about, like, if he, goes and has this big conversations with his daughter, am I being overbearing? I mean, she's his daughter. She wants to probably please her dad. She might be like, oh no, like, it's fine. Even if there's some part of her inside that is kind of thinking that. So I think there's maybe a moment there for awareness ahead of time that, like, hey, if I'm going into these conversations, what do I want to get out of them? How might I want to listen with open ears and have a productive conversation so that the other party, you know, has a chance to actually speak, but not necessarily worry about how you're receiving it. You can have an open conversation there. But yeah, even with that, they may not tell you. So it might be a moment where you check body language. Do they seem to be closing off when they talk to me, even if they're saying words that sound very open, that kind of thing. And I think a third thing here too is it could be that Bruce, upon reflecting on this, um, maybe he's just like, maybe he doesn't have a conversation, but just decides he's going to change his actions. Remembering that, like, when we change our actions with other people around us, that can also be just like really, really confusing, even if it seems like the new behavior is the preferred one. So if Bruce went from being overbearing, like, hey, you have to get straight A's, I'm going to look at your homework. Did you get your homework done? Just as an example. And then suddenly stops doing that with his daughter and doesn't do those types of check-ins, that could be really confusing to her. It could go from, okay, I'm used to dad being one way and now he's not checking in on me. What does that mean? Because our brains always want to make meaning out of things. So, so if I had suddenly with like my coworker way back in the day suddenly started being really, really nice and friendly and whatever, she might look at me suspiciously like, who is this new person? What is going on? Like, who, not trusting of that. So I think there's also an awareness there that, like, if we're changing anything, again, from our best intentions, the other person may react in a particular way just because they're confused. What are you doing now? Who is this new person? I don't know. So, so I do think a course of action for Bruce there could be to pause and maybe have those conversations with people and see if there are some minor tweaks there. But I think if he went in with the knee-jerk reaction he has in the moment when he's feeling super hurt with Kelly, he may not get the results that he's looking for there because he's acting out of reaction. He wants to change things immediately so that he can feel better and, thinking that other people might feel better, even if they feel worse. So that was kind of the first thing that stood out for me from this episode, is just Bruce's reaction to Kelly leaving. Lots of reactions amongst the tribe for her leaving. I think a lot of people were surprised. Jake was just, whoa, surprised. I mean, he gives a woohoo and then realizes that he is overreacted there, maybe not in a favorable way. It didn't look great. everybody's kind of sad about Kelly leaving. Kendra's very devastated. Her friend is gone. And of course, Bruce feels responsible. So see a lot of different reactions there. Um, so moving on in the episode, I think I've mentioned on this podcast before, listen to On Fire, the official Survivor podcast, and they had some interesting points of conversation from this week. You don't need to listen to that in order to keep listening to this podcast, but I do often like to get the behind the scenes from them because it is fascinating. And, we are reminded in this episode that Austin has not one, but two idols. And, during this episode, when he split up from his alliance, he actually gives his idol to Julie to protect her, just in case something happens. Like, hey, I don't want you voted out. I want you here. I want to play with you. So, hey, here is this idol. So Austin gives up this way he could have protected himself to another teammate that he thinks might be in danger if she doesn't win immunity. And he plays it from there. He doesn't know what's going to happen. And Jeff brought up a really good point on his podcast, where he talks about how just Austin's playing differently than everyone else. It could be just the thought of having two idols. He feels safer, so he feels fewer to do it. But what Jeff said is, if you give yourself permission to lose, then it allows you to play to win. And I actually had to pause that podcast a couple times and listen to that back, because I think, obviously he was talking about it in context of Austin. Like, he gave himself permission to lose. He might give that idol to Julie. She plays it in a way that he goes home. We don't know. We never know on these immunity challenges. She might give it to someone else. She might keep it. He might be the one that's blindsided because he still has an idol and she has information on him. The rest of his alliance does. But by giving himself permission to lose, he is gaining points to help him win. He's earning this resume. Because listen, if Julie is on the jury at the end, she's going to remember that moment that Austin gave her the idol to try to save her. The rest of the alliance is going to see that as an act of bravery. Nobody wants to give up an idol. Like, it's a very big move to do that, because you could be like, use that for yourself for the next two tribals and move further in the game. But he, in thinking about the long game, is like, you know what, maybe it's worth it here to lose this potential short-term gain in order to win the entire game out here, to win Survivor, to win $1 million, that kind of thing. I was just like thinking about this in, what Jeff had to say. If you give yourself permission to lose, it allows you to play to win. I was just thinking about that in terms of like our everyday life. I guess for that phrase, I kind of changed the word lose to fail. If you give yourself permission to fail, then it allows you to play to win. This is something I've been thinking a lot about for myself and for some of my clients is, for many of us, grew up in an environment where losing or failing or not doing the very best, like getting the A plus, is losing. And it is not something that is revered. It is not something that is celebrated or awarded. And so, as we learn that when we were younger kids, like growing up into adults, a lot of us will continue to do that into adulthood. We may not go all out on something. So, I always think about this in the context of business, but it could be any goal, like anything that you want to set out to achieve for yourself. For a lot of people, like, there is a fear of, what does it mean if I actually go all out and try for that thing and I don't get it? I think there's a fear of what you'll feel, like a fear of disappointment, a fear of what other people will think about you, almost a fear of the unknown. Like, okay, I tried, I wanted the thing, I went all out for it, I pulled out all the stops and I didn't get it. Now what? I think the now what is fearful, like people feel fearful of that side of things. So it's always interesting to see a situation where somebody is playing so freely as Austin is in the game. Um, because I think a lot of other people would feel afraid of playing in that way. But it really is the way forward here. I mean, it makes him a threat, but it also like to be voted out, but it also makes him a threat to win because if he's willing to do that, he's willing to like put all of his cards out and play with his whole heart. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think if you scan your life right now, you might notice an area in which you're doing this. Like, where is there an area where I might want something, but I'm not going all in because I'm afraid of what that could mean for me? It's something I coach on a lot. I think it's like I was mentioning before, a lot of us learn this in childhood. So it's almost a primal fear of, well, if I fail, everybody in my life might hate me. They may not love me. They may not show affection because winning is the way that I'm a part of the group. Um, it would make sense that somebody wouldn't go all out if they were worried and had that type of fear. I think for me, like mine always goes back to like a fear of abandonment. Like if I go all out in this, kind of similar to what I was just saying, like people may leave me, that kind of thing, or they might really know me, and then what will they think about me? So it always seems a little bit safer to just play really, really small and just stay in that little box that you've created for yourself. And so I think it's worth being aware of is that, you know, this is the obstacle that's in the way of getting the thing that you really want. So I love that Jeff said that because, I was watching Austin play, and I think when you're sitting on your couch and you're just like watching a TV show, you're like, wow, that's amazing that that person is going all out and doing those things. But I don't know. I sometimes forget that they are also human inside there. Like, I'm sure Austin has fears and doubts about like, should I do this or should I not? He seems so confident on screen, but like, think about it. If I do this thing, my tribe might turn against me. They might use this against me and leave me. Like, if I do this thing, uh, everybody's going to see me as a threat and they might turn against me and leave me. Like, in all situations, you could probably come up with a way in which you will lose. And so it might seem safer. Oh, I should just keep this idle. I should just keep this idle because the fear of the unknown is so much worse than just at least knowing a protection for the next two tribal councils. So I definitely think that's an area where you can like check in with yourself of like, is there any spaces in which I am playing safer and kind of sticking to what I know because there's almost like this catastrophic thinking about what will happen next and next and next if I actually put myself out there and go. And I often think it goes back to like, then I will not no longer be a part of my social group or the people that love me will no longer love me and those kinds of things. And, if you've ever had an experience in your life where that seemed true, like, okay, well, I did this thing and then somebody left me, you see that situation with Bruce. I did things in this game and then the person like got voted out and they left. You might hold your cards a little bit closer so you can kind of scan for that. But yeah, I love that Jeff said that because I think that kind of sums up most seasons of Survivor. The people who are incredibly brave are the ones that make it to the end, and brave means so many different things among so many different characters as they go on, cast members. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was something else that was said that I really liked from the podcast, the On Fire podcast. And again, you don't need to go listen to that. It is a great podcast, though. It's if you're nerdy about Survivor like me, you might enjoy it. But they have Rick Devens, who is a former cast member. He's also on the podcast, and he gives the players insight. And he said something that was like, of course, made my little life coach heart sing. He's talking about how one of the things that's like amazing to watch on the show is in his own experience, he says like when you actually start believing you can do it, it's a whole lot easier to do it. So I think in the context of this, he was talking about Julie and Bruce. So Julie and Bruce are the two oldest cast members on the show. And we see them this week and a previous week being the final two standing in the immunity challenge. Probably nobody would have guessed it. Like, oh, these are the oldest people. They may not have the endurance, stamina, strength, all the things that we think happens as we age, and yet they are the ones that are left standing. And Rick Devens was talking about this in context of, you know, on the show, there's a lot of challenges that you may not face in your everyday life. Uh, Certainly, most of us are not in Fiji doing challenges where we have to hold plates against things, like stay on a pole for any length of time, where our body is just shaking beyond the point of what we think we can do. And so, when you actually start believing you can do something, like so Julie and Bruce didn't let their age hold anything against them. They didn't let the fact that there were other players in the game, they didn't have that hold against them. They were believing they could do it, makes it a whole lot easier to do it. We see the contrast of this with when the losers of the immunity challenge for this one, Emily Katura Austin, get sent on a journey where they have to do a math problem, and they do some interviews with Emily where she talks about how doing math and the way that they're doing math there is one of her downfalls in her job. It's something that, she feels bad about, that she can't do. She feels like she should be able to do it. She thinks she does. And we see this moment where she stops believing in herself. Once they flip that 3-minute timer, which, as an aside, anytime we have time applied to things, most of us get a little bit like heated and a little feverish about it. But Emily talks about this as being something she's not good at. She doesn't believe she can do it. And so you see her just kind of crumpling in on herself, not being able to do it in this episode, shuts off from the possibility of being able to do it. So you see a lot of this as the show goes on. And again, of course, applies to everyday life. If you actually start believing you can do something, it's a whole lot easier to do it. Why? Because the obstacle of belief or disbelief isn't there for you anymore. It's why in life coaching, a lot of the work that we do is uncovering, what do you currently believe? What do you think is true? And is there some wiggle room there? Does it make sense to continue to believe that? Is that what's holding you back from the thing that you want? And how can we work on supporting you to believing something else? So it's not like airy fairy new thoughts, like, oh, I'm just going to believe like positive intentions, but it's actually like breaking it down and going, okay, I currently believe, if you were to think about Julie and Bruce, it's impossible for me to hold these plates. They're holding plates against some stands for any length of time. If you believe that, you're probably not going to put forth the energy to continue to hold your hands out, because why would we do that? Our brains want to conserve energy. That's its job. If we can't actually, if we don't actually think we can do something at the end of the day, why would we put forth the energy to do it? Not going to do it. But Julie and Bruce don't believe that. Like at some point, they're like, okay, maybe I can do this. So now we have a new way of thinking, right? We go from I can't to maybe I can do this. Maybe this is for me. Maybe I can try to do this. With that, maybe I should put forth some energy towards doing this, because maybe I can. The longer they do it, the more it's easier to believe. Like, maybe I can do it. Maybe I can do these challenges. Maybe I'm not too old for this. This is one of the things I really like about Survivor is you do see a lot of players along the way that do start believing in themselves, things that they didn't think they could do before. They build up the stamina of it's almost like a stamina of belief. Like, okay, maybe I can do it. Okay, yep, I can do it. I have evidence I can do this. And they start to believe themselves a little bit more. It's not to say that the way that Emily was thinking about the math equation was wrong or there's anything wrong with her. It's just a block that she has, something that she could work through if she wanted to in the future of like, okay, maybe I can figure out how to do math problems like this would be kind of the way forward. Kind of opening the door a little bit from full stop, I can't. Why would I even bother to, yeah, maybe I could do this. Maybe there's a way through. Builds you up towards actually believing you can do something. So I thought that was just like an interesting way of thinking about this is a lot of what makes the show enjoyable to watch is watching people start to believe themselves. They intentionally cast people on the show that are just kind of your normal person sitting on the couch, very they used to have people that were super athletes back in the day. Now they're kind of just getting your average person from the couch. They're getting a lot of new narratives, which is amazing. We have a lot more diversity on the show. But there's always there's often now in this new era, maybe somebody you could look at and be like, okay, that person's similar-ish to me. If they can do it, maybe I can do it. So for me, I guess my nearest peer, being the age I am now, is Julie. So it's interesting to watch that because I do actually have a lot of thoughts about what I'm physically capable and not. I have strong belief I can walk for many, many miles, but like a Ironman or a mud run or any of those more like race type things, I definitely have a belief like, yeah, that's not for me. Maybe that's not true. So I think there was also an interesting point too, where I had a belief going into this that we often don't see older players on the game because they're just not qualified, because they've sort of aged out for health reasons or whatever. Maybe they're more of a liability. But they actually revealed on the podcast that the reason they don't have more older players is because fewer older people apply. They get a lot of people in their 20s, early 30s applying for the show, but they don't often get older players. And so they don't just cast like, okay, we need the old guy, we need the old woman, we need this, we need that. But yeah, fewer people over 40 apply. So they just don't have those types of people applying for the show, getting on the show. So I think if they had more of a population of older, older being over the age of 40, people applying, who come in with interesting personality that would add an interesting dynamic to the game, there would be more people that were brought on for that. But yeah, Jeff revealed that's what. I was totally wrong about that. So I was happy to be wrong about that because I think, you know, uh, again, this is a way in which my own limiting belief had me, like not even considering, is that an option? I don't know. So I think that's what makes this interesting to watch is that, there's ways in which if we're open to it, we can start questioning the things that we just thought were true. Maybe it's not true. Maybe it's not true that older players can't succeed in a game. We see it happen. We saw it happen here. So yeah, I mean, that stood out for me. I am, as we get closer, not at all sure about who is gonna win the $1 million here. I think almost anybody could at this point. I think there's a lot of amazing like gameplay that we're seeing going on, a lot of fast moving strategizing. I don't often know what's about to happen when they get to tribal. They don't seem to know what's going to happen when they get to tribal. So I wish I could say right here, like, I absolutely think it's going to be Julie or, one of the other players, but I have no clue. And they always tease for the next episode. It looks like maybe there's a target on D, but maybe there's not. We'll see. It also seems as if there might be a budding romance between D and Austin. Maybe, maybe not. So that could be a ding to both of their games. We'll see. But I'm just delighted to kind of be in a space where I have no idea what's going to happen, but I'm incredibly invested to see what does. So anyway, continue to enjoy this journey with us as we go on with this podcast, with this show. If you want to talk more about this, feel free to DM me on Instagram. My handle is at Lynn Grogan, LYNNGROGAN. You can find me there. You could also just shoot me an email, lynn@lynngrogan.com. And if you're looking to work with a life coach, you can find my details in the show notes, or you can just find me at lynngrogan.com. So thanks for joining me today on this solo episode. We'll be back next week with another fun guest. I'll talk to you later.